Hi, this is Mark again, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experiences, one of my experiences, or several of my experiences in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as I was getting older and discovering things, and some of the things that caused me some I guess you could say, a crisis in my faith, and which eventually actually left the church. So one of them, it would be surprising because you'd think it had to do with church history or the Book of Mormon or something like polygamy or something like that. It had to do with the Old Testament. So there were two things. First of all, as a kid, I remember the different stories about Noah and the Ark and the Tower of Babel and the first man and woman, Adam and Eve and all of that. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believes in a literal they believe it. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints takes the Bible literally. So they believe that Adam and Eve really were the first man and woman, and they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, 6,000 years ago, and the big flood with Noah and the Ark would have been about 4,000 years ago. And so we've only been on the earth for, a little over 6,000 years since Adam and Eve. And so if you take it literally, it kind of goes against what a lot of science says and what a lot of logic says. I served a missionary for the church as a missionary, and went to Denver, Colorado, and then got back, and I had different positions, leadership positions. And then one of the positions I was given, this is after I'd been an elders quorum president, I'd been in a bishopric and a bunch of stuff. I was given the assignment to teach seminary. Seminary is a class that's held for high school students before they go to high school. And it's a religion course, basically, and they would go to the church into a classroom, and I would teach this religion class, which was about an hour long, and then from there they go to school, and then they have their first period. So this is like the zero period. And this religion course that you taught each year had a different topic. The first year being, they rotated. The 4 topics were the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, and LDS church history. Now, I've needed to be ahead of my students, and so I wanted to be ready for their questions. I knew that the Old Testament was going to be coming around, so I decided to start right away in studying that Old Testament because I found it's a long book for one, and it's a difficult one. So I went page by page, very, very carefully through it for 3 years, literally studying it, not just reading it, studying the book. Now, I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is something that the church believes is an ancient record that Joseph Smith was found in a hill near his home in upstate New York that an angel had told him about, and he found it, and then through the power of gift of God, and actually it was by putting 2 stones he found in the well into a hat, looking into the hat, that God then translated the book for him, and it turned out that this record on these ancient gold plates were something written by basically the people who were natives that had been living for a few thousand years, and that they had come over from Israel. They were of the children of Israel, and they had come really down in a couple different times. The Native Americans are, according to the church, descendants of these people that wrote the Book of Mormon. In the Book of Mormon, it talks about 2 different groups of people. One of them is a group of people that came because Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and they came and they come across and settle. And then there was another group that you read about in the book of Ether in the Book of Mormon, which is supposedly an earlier record that they had found, and these were people that had come across when the language was confounded at the Tower of Babel. God was mad at everybody because they were trying to build the Tower to Heaven, and so he confounds their language, and now this is how you get German and Spanish and English and Russian and Chinese and all of that. And then because their languages were confused, the ones of each language then separated into different areas. And the book of Ether is about one such family that kept their language. The whole family kept it together, and then they're told to build these barges that were sort of like submarines, and in a way. And they build these barges that God told them to build, and then they come across to America. But this is at that time, way back earlier. And then they have their big civilization they build up, and it becomes really big, and then they become evil, and the civilization is destroyed. Okay, sounds far-fetched, I know. But if you grow up in the church, and if these things have become familiar to you, and if you, I mean, you're going to believe it, right? Well, at least I believe it. And millions of Mormons do believe it. I was having a problem with this, and that is that in order for the Book of Mormon to be true, that had to be true. Because if that's not true, then that story in the Book of Mormon is not true. The other problem in the Bible that I found was the story of Noah and the ark. Because it's a pretty far-fetched story, frankly, because you know how many animals there really are, species, even though we're killing them off quickly. There is still 1.1 billion species of animals on this planet that we know of, and that's a lot of animals to put on one small ark that's smaller than the Queen Mary. Okay, it's not really that big, and actually there'd be twice as many because there were two of each kind. And then how you get them all there. The reason why the flood is something that was important to the Mormon Church is that Joseph Smith, one of the places where they call them the saints, where the members of the church were in the early days, was Independence, Missouri. And near there is a place called Adam-on-Diamond, and it's further up. By the way, Independence is near Kansas City, and then if you go up north of that, there's a road that goes off to the left up to Adam-on-Diamond. I've been there. There's just a sign there, and it says that the church put, and there's a hill, and there's some trees, and supposedly that is where Adam spoke to his posterity. So it had to be in walking distance from where the Garden of Eden is, or was. So Joseph Smith taught that the Garden of Eden had been in Missouri. Well, how is that possible? The Great Flood. That's how. So there was this big flood that God made because he got mad at people because they were wicked. So he decided to destroy not only all of them, but everything, except for, we're going to save all the animals by having all of them come, the polar bears and all of the tigers and lions, and you're going, okay, this is a lot of animals, and then how do they get from Antarctica, places like that, and then how do you take care of their waste, and how do you feed, the food you've got to feed them for 40 days, and then the amount of water that would take to cover the entire planet, and then where did the water go after it was gone, and then the fact that according to the timing of the ark and the flood, already you had, the Native Americans were already here, and the Chinese already had an empire going, and in fact the first pyramid had already been built in Egypt. And so you go, okay, well, all right, so it doesn't even jive with history. You look at the town of Jericho, which has a history that goes back 10,000 years. The more I researched it, the more I decided that there's no way that that was literal. There's no way that the flood was actually a literal flood that covered everywhere. Now, there might have been some flood somewhere. There's been speculation that it was the Black Sea or something, that I don't doubt that there was something that became a legend and got passed down over for thousands and thousands of years, and that's likely what happened. The story of the confounding of the languages is all the languages being changed at one time because God gets mad because they try to build a building to get to heaven is extremely implausible, because we know how languages just developed. We know how, like the Germanic languages, how English basically is a Germanic language, and they've traced how the languages evolved over time. And so that makes that implausible. Well, if that's implausible, what happens? The story of the Book of Mormon fails. So my way of discovering that the Book of Mormon was false was actually initially that. Now, there were other things that then developed from it, but that was my initial thing. It was finding out that the Old Testament, as far as I was concerned, I mean, there were so many things in the Old Testament other than that didn't make sense as far as a religion. And it's, that's a loving God that's telling the children of Israel to go in and kill every man, woman, and child, and animal, and just the genocide that is commanded. It was like, okay, this is a terrible book. I did not get closer to God reading the Old Testament, not at all. And anyway, that is how I initially really had problems. Now, my father, I got to get back to the story here. My father was a physicist, but he was also an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he'd even written a book trying to square religion with science. And so we were in the car driving one time, and it was actually in the last year of his life. And I asked him about that specifically. I said, "What about the flood? How can you believe that? How do you make sense out of that?" And he just goes, "I don't know." So, "Isn't there anything?" He said, I don't know. He finally came up with, well, maybe this is all just a test, and history isn't really what you think it is, because this is basically a matrix. He didn't use that word, but he described something like a matrix, and there's some kind of a thing on your head, and it's going to be, taken off, and that's your test. So it's like, okay, that makes as much sense as nothing. So that didn't really solve much for me. Well, what about carbon dating and Adam and Eve and all that? And he goes, well, carbon dating is very accurate. So what about evolution? Because the church doesn't believe in evolution. I mean, he didn't have an answer. His final answer really was, the reason why I believe in the church is because it's too frightening for me to believe in the alternative. I don't know what you do with that. But anyway, that's my story for the day.